Before you judge the pirate, understand his water first. 3 weeks out of port, the water barrel on a pirate ship was no longer water. It was a living thing. Green film on the surface. Black worms curling at the bottom. A smell that made grown men gag before they drank. And they drank it anyway, because the alternative was dying of dying thirst in the middle of the Atlantic. Then someone handed them a cup of something else, something so violent it was nicknamed Kill Devil. It burned the throat, it burned the fear out of a man, and it burned away just enough of his conscience to let him do what pirates did. That drink was rum. And for nearly 100 years, it wasn't a party favor or a joke on a movie poster. It was the fuel, the wage, the medicine, and the executioner of the entire golden age of piracy. This is the real story of the liquid that built and then burned down the pirate world. To understand rum, you first have to understand how close every sailor was to dying of something that had nothing to do with cannons or cutlasses. A ship carrying 100 men needed thousands of gallons of fresh water for even a short voyage. That water was sealed into wooden casks, and wood is porous, and heat is relentless in the Caribbean. Within 2 or 3 weeks, algae bloomed. Bacteria multiplied. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera moved through a crew faster than any enemy broadside. Historians agree that disease killed more sailors in this era than combat ever did. And bad water was one of the biggest reasons why. Beer spoiled almost as fast and took up too much cargo space. Wine turned to vinegar the moment it crossed into tropical heat. So when Caribbean sugar planters found themselves drowning in a worthless byproduct called molasses, a thick, sticky sludge left over after sugar crystals were extracted, somebody figured out that fermenting and distilling it produced something new, something strong enough to kill bacteria in bad water on contact, something that never really went bad at all. The English called it Kill Devil because the early batches were so raw they felt like fighting Satan on the way down. One account from Barbados in 1651 described it plainly as hot, hellish, and terrible. But hellish and effective are not mutually exclusive. Mixed with water, sugar, and lime juice, it became grog. The drink that let a crew survive a voyage their own drinking water would have killed them on. Rum, in other words, did not start as a pirate indulgence. It started as a public health intervention nobody planned for. In 1655, England seized Jamaica from Spain, and Vice Admiral William Penn made a decision that would echo for 3 centuries. He switched the Royal Navy's official drink ration from imported French brandy to cheap, abundant Jamaican rum. Every sailor, from the lowest deckhand to the officers, on the quarterdeck, received a half pint of rum a day, a genuinely staggering amount of hard liquor by any modern standard. But the Navy poured with rules. An officer measured every ration. There were watch schedules, punishments, and a chain of command standing between a drunk sailor and a loaded cannon. Pirate ships had none of that. Most pirates were former Navy men, former privateers, former merchant sailors. They inherited the rum habit from the exact same culture. But a pirate crew was a democracy of outlaws. They elected their captains. They wrote and signed their own articles of agreement. And on almost every pirate ship, the unwritten rule about rum was simple. Everyone drinks. Everyone drinks as much as they want, and no one has the authority to say, stop. That single missing rule, the absence of a limit, is the hinge this entire story turns on. When a pirate crew boarded a captured merchant ship, contemporary accounts describe them. Heading for the liquor hold, before the gold, before the navigation instruments, before anything else. Captain Charles Johnson's 1724 book, A General History of the Pirates, still one of the richest sources historians have on this era, records crews who found a captured ship loaded with silk and spice, ignored the fortune sitting in the hold, and spent 3 straight days drinking a few barrels of rum instead. That wasn't stupidity. It was priorities. Rum, unlike stolen silk, didn't need a buyer, a fence, or a friendly port to be useful. You could drink it immediately, trade it at the next harbor, or use it to bribe a corrupt official who'd never openly deal with a pirate for coin, but would happily look the other way for a few barrels of spirits. In ports up and down the American coast, rum functioned as a currency more dependable than actual money. Everyone wanted it, and everyone recognized its value. And when the ship's plunder was divided under the articles, captain and quartermaster taking larger shares, specialists like the surgeon or navigator earning bonuses, rum was the one thing split dead equally among every man aboard, regardless of rank, in a system built on brutal inequality. That made the rum barrel one of the only genuinely democratic institutions a pirate crew maintained. It also did something darker and more practical. It gave men the nerve to do something almost no sane person would volunteer for sober. Swing a grappling hook onto a warship, bristling with cannon, and fight men who wanted them dead. Liquid courage wasn't a figure of speech on a pirate ship. It was standard operating procedure. Before we go any further, before we get into how this same drink turned disciplined crews into raging animals, how it decided who got hanged and who didn't, and how it eventually helped end the golden age of piracy entirely. If you're the kind of person who wants the history books didn't bother to tell you, this channel is for you. Hit subscribe now, because what comes next is where the story turns genuinely dark. Back to the Kill Devil. Here is where romance dies and history gets clinical. Alcohol lowers inhibition, impairs judgment, and increases aggression. That's not folklore, that's physiology. Now, put that inside. Men who already carried loaded pistols, lived outside every law that governed ordinary society, and faced essentially no consequences for violence. The results were exactly what you'd expect. Take Edward Teach, Blackbeard. Nearly every surviving account of his behavior mentions alcohol. In the same breath as his cruelty, he reportedly mixed rum with gunpowder and drank it in front of his crew, as a show of dominance no sober man would attempt. In one infamous incident, he shot his own first mate, Israel Hands, under the table during a drinking session, crippling him for life, and when asked why, Blackbeard is said to have answered that if he didn't shoot one of his own men now and then, they'd forget who he was. The story may be exaggerated in the retelling, but the underlying pattern, heavy drinking triggering random, casual violence, shows up across dozens of independent accounts from the period. Not just his. Or take Charles Vane, captains, one of the most feared captains in the Caribbean, whose crew drank so constantly that they repeatedly let easy prizes slip away. When they finally voted him out in favor of his quartermaster, Jack Rackham, the complaints against him centered on exactly this: erratic, unpredictable leadership that multiple sources tied directly to drink. Contrast that with Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, one of the only captains who saw the danger clearly. Roberts preferred tea to rum, dressed like a nobleman, and wrote strict drinking rules directly into his ship's articles. Lights out by 8 at night, and any man who wanted to keep drinking after that had to do it in the open, on deck, where his behavior could be watched. Roberts captured over 400 ships during his career, more than almost any pirate in history. And historians consistently point to his discipline, including his control of alcohol, as a major reason his run lasted as long as it did. And then there's Stede Bonnet, a wealthy Barbados plantation owner who inexplicably walked away from a comfortable life to become a pirate, and was, by every account, catastrophically bad at it. Multiple sources describe him leaning on rum to manage the sheer terror of a life he was never built for, his judgment collapsing along with his crew's confidence in him. Until he was captured and hanged in Charleston in 1718, reportedly a confused shadow of the gentleman who'd set out 2 years earlier. Ashore, rum had its own signature drink. Bumbo, a sweetened, spiced cousin of Navy grog made from rum, water, sugar, and nutmeg. It was the house drink of the Pirate Republic of Nassau, roughly 1706 to 1718, when the town had no real colonial authority left, and pirates governed themselves, which mostly meant they drank without limits. Contemporary accounts describe men stumbling through Nassau's streets at every hour, fights erupting constantly, an entire local economy built around keeping the rum flowing. When Governor Wood's voyagers finally arrived in 1718 to shut the pirate haven down, he noted that the pardoned men were orderly enough sober and savage the rest of the time, which, by his account, was most of the time. But there's a darker layer underneath all of this that the swashbuckling movies never mention. Every drop of that rum was produced by enslaved people. The sugar and rum economy of the Caribbean was inseparable from the transatlantic slave trade. Enslaved Africans planted the cane, cut it, and ran the boiling houses and stills, often under conditions so brutal that life expectancy on many plantations was measured in a handful of years. Rum itself was one of the core commodities of the triangular trade. Manufactured goods to West Africa, enslaved people to the Caribbean, sugar and rum back to Europe and the colonies. So there's a bitter irony sitting at the bottom of every pirate's cup. Men who called themselves free, who'd walked away from kings and navies, and the law itself were entirely dependent on a product built on the most extreme form of human bondage. In history, most pirates never reckoned with that contradiction. They just drank. Rum wasn't just consumed on a pirate ship. It was woven into nearly every ritual aboard one. New recruits, whether they joined willingly or been forced aboard, were expected to drink with the crew as proof of loyalty. Refusing was treated as an insult to the brotherhood itself. Before a boarding action, crews often drank together, partly for courage, partly as a unifying act that said every man in this fight would stand for the others. It even shaped pirate justice. When a man was sentenced under the ship's articles, he was often handed a drink before punishment. And when the sentence was marooning, left alone on some forgotten spit of sand, tradition dictated he be given a pistol, a bottle of water, and a bottle of rum. That wasn't kindness. It was a slow, deliberate cruelty. Drink the rum, and you're left facing your own doom, completely sober and completely alone. Even at the gallows, rum showed up one last time. Condemned pirates were frequently given as much rum as they wanted in their final days. Practical, since a drunk prisoner was easier to manage than a terrified one, but also its own strange mercy. William Fly reportedly cursed the crowd and his executioner while swaying on his feet at his 1726 hanging in Boston. Calico Jack Rackham was said to be drunk when he was captured, and drunk again when he swung for it in Port Royal. Here's the twist that ends the whole story. The drink that made pirates brave enough to attack is the same one that made them careless enough to get caught. The golden age of piracy didn't end because navies suddenly got smarter. It ended because colonial authorities figured out that pirates were easiest to catch drunk in port, which was almost always Henry Morgan's infamous 1671 raid on Panama City and his 1668 sack of Portobello both descended into days of uncontrolled drinking that left his own men struggling to hold formation, let alone tactical discipline. And Blackbeard's final battle in November 1718 followed the same script. Lieutenant Robert Maynard's Royal Navy sloop found Blackbeard's crew at anchor off Ocracoke Island the morning after a night of hard drinking, many of them still hungover or drunk when the attack came at dawn. Blackbeard himself fought like a man half dead already, absorbing 5 gunshot wounds and roughly 20 sword cuts before he fell, but his impaired crew made the fight shorter and more lopsided than it should have been. Again and again, the historical record shows pirates undone, not by superior naval tactics, but by their own alcohol-soaked carelessness. Sleeping lookouts, grounded ships, crews too drunk to raise sail in time to run. 1517. Conclusion. The legacy that outlived. Every pirate who drank it rum outlasted every single pirate who ever loved it. The Royal Navy kept issuing its official rum ration for over 300 years, from Vice Admiral Penn's decision in 1655 all the way to July 31, 1970, a date sailors still call Black Tot Day, when the tradition finally ended, and some crews held mock funerals for the rum barrel itself, and the cultural memory never let go either. When Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Treasure Island in 1883, nearly 2 centuries after the Golden Age, he reached for a sea shanty with a chorus about a bottle of rum, because he understood that rum wasn't just a detail of pirate life, it was the detail. Every pirate film, every costume, every joke about a captain who's misplaced his liquor is standing on top of a very real, very brutal history. What that history actually shows is this: rum in the pirate world was never a punchline. It was a survival tool that curdled into an addiction that hardened into a death sentence. It kept men alive on voyages that should have killed them. It gave them the nerve to attack ships they had no business attacking. And then, slowly and predictably, it destroyed their judgment, their bodies, their loyalty to each other, and in the end, their freedom. Every barrel of rum that crossed the Caribbean carried all of it at once. The brutality of the plantation system, the desperation of outlaws, the economics of empire, and the simple human need to make an unbearable life feel bearable for one more night. Rum never promised freedom. It never promised courage. What it actually sold, 1 cup at a time, was forgetting. And for a pirate, forgetting was sometimes the most valuable cargo in the entire hold. If this deep dive into the bilge of history kept you watching to the end, you know what to do. Subscribe, because we're covering the parts of the pirate world the storybooks always leave out. And if you want to know exactly how the last pirate republic collapsed and what happened to the men who tried to build a country out of stolen gold, that video is on screen right now.